Hungarian major landlocked country of Central Europe. The capital is Budapest. At the end of World War I defeated Hungary, lost 71% of its territory as a result of the Treaty of Trianon in 1920. Since then, grappling with the loss of more than two-thirds of their territory, and people Hungarians looked to a past that was greater than the present as their collective psyche suffered from the so-called Trianon syndrome. The syndrome was widespread prior to 1945. It was suppressed during Soviet domination 1945 to 90. And it reemerged during independence in 1990 when it took on a different form. The modern country appears to be split into two irreconcilable factions, those who are still concerned about Trianon and those who would like to forget it. This split is evident in most aspects of Hungarian political, social, and cultural life. Hungarians who know their country as Magyarország, land of Magyars, are unique among the nations of Europe in that they speak a language that is not related to any other major European language. Linguistically surrounded by alien nations, Hungarians felt isolated through much of their history. This may be the reason why after Christianization they became attached to Latin, which became the language of culture, scholarship, and state administration, and even the language of the Hungarian nobility until 1844. Landlocked and lying approximately between latitudes 45° and 49° N and longitudes 16° and 23° E. Hungary shares a border to the north with Slovakia, to the northeast with Ukraine, to the east with Romania, to the south with Serbia, specifically the Vojvodina region, and Croatia, to the southwest with Slovenia, and to the west with Austria. Plant and animal life. Human activities over the ages have largely destroyed the natural vegetation of Hungary. Just about half of the land is regularly cultivated and about 1/6 is used for non-agricultural purposes. The remainder comprises meadows and rough pasture as well as forest and woodland. No part of the country is of sufficient elevation to support natural coniferous forest. Beach is the climax community. At the highest elevations, oak woodland alternating with scrubby grassland are the climax communities. At lower elevations in the upland regions, deer and wild pigs are abundant in the forests. At higher elevations, while rodents, hares, partridge, and pheasant inhabit the lowlands. The once numerous varieties of marsh waterfowl survive only in nature reserves. There are diverse species of freshwater fish, including pike bream and pike perch. Significant water and air pollution occurs in some of the industrial regions of the country. People, ethnic groups, and languages. From its inception in the 10th century, Hungary was a multi-ethnic country. Major territorial changes made it ethnically homogeneous after World War I, however, and more than 4/5 of the population is now ethnically Hungarian and speaks Hungarian Magyar as the mother tongue. The Hungarian language is classified as a member of the Ugric branch of the Uralic languages. As such, it is most closely related to the Ugric languages Kani and Mansi, which are spoken east of the Ural Mountains. It is also related, though more distantly, to Finnish and Estonian, each of which is like Hungarian a national language, to the Sami language of far northern Scandinavia, and more distantly still to the Samoyedic languages of Siberia. Religion. Hungary claims no official religion and guarantees religious freedom. More than 1/3 of the people are Roman Catholic, most of them living in the western and northern parts of the country. About 1/10 of the population are Calvinist. Lutherans constitute the next most significant minority faith, and relatively smaller groups belong to various other Christian denominations. The Jewish community, which constituted 5% of the population before World War II, was decimated by the Holocaust and is now much smaller. Economy of Hungary. Historically, prior to World War II, Hungary was mostly agrarian. Beginning in 1948, a forced industrialization policy based on the Soviet pattern changed the economic character of the country. Essentially, planned economy was introduced and millions of new jobs were created in industry and later in services. This was accomplished largely through a policy of forced accumulation, keeping wages low and the prices of consumer goods high made it possible for more people to be employed, and because consumer goods were beyond their means, most Hungarians put more of their earnings in savings, which became available for use by the government. Agriculture. Agriculture's role in the Hungarian economy declined steadily in the generations following World War II, dropping from half of the GDP in the immediate post-war period to only 4% of the GDP in 2005. Nevertheless, agriculture remains important and Hungary is virtually self-sufficient in food production. The Hungarian climate is favorable for agriculture and half of the country's land is arable, about one-fifth is covered by woods. About one-tenth of the country's total area is under permanent cultivation. Agriculture accounted for nearly one-fourth of Hungarian exports before the economic transition of the 1990s, during which animal stocks decreased by one-third and agricultural output and exports declined by half. Transportation and telecommunications. Railways have long been the center of Hungary's transportation system. By World War I, the country had a modern network that was among the densest in Europe, and it continued to expand regularly until the late 1970s, with electrification beginning in the previous decade. When industrial production declined during the transition to a market economy, rail transport of goods dropped sharply, accompanied by significant cutbacks in government subsidies that contributed to the deterioration of the railway infrastructure. By the end of the 20th century, however, the EU had begun funding rail network improvements as well as roadway projects. Health and welfare. Following World War II, health care improved dramatically under state socialism, with significant increases in the number of physicians and hospital beds in Hungary. By the 1970s, free health care was guaranteed to every citizen. Higher quality private health care permitted but limited before the transition period grew in importance from the early 1990s. A broad range of social services was provided by the communist government, including child support, extensive maternity leave, and an old age pension system for which men became eligible at age 60 and women at age 55. This costly welfare system was a heavy burden on the country's finances. Education. Ever since the start of obligatory universal education initiated by the law of 1868, Hungary followed the German system of education on all levels. This included 4, then 6, and finally 8 years of elementary schooling, and for a select few after the first 4 years of this basic education, 8 years of rigorous gymnasium studies that prepared the students for entrance to universities. These universities were also organized along the German model, with basic degrees after 4 or 5 years followed for those in the humanities and sciences by the doctorate based on a modest dissertation. Those wishing to become a member of the professorate also had to go through the process of habilitation. Cultural life. The cultural milieu of Hungary is a result of the diverse mix of genuine Hungarian peasant culture and the cosmopolitan culture of an influential German and Jewish urban population. Both the coffee house and the music of the Roma also have had an impact. Cultural life traditionally has been highly political since national culture became the sine qua non of belated nation building from the early 19th century. Theater, opera, and literature in particular played crucial roles in developing national consciousness. Poets and writers, especially in crisis situations, became national heroes and prophets. Governments also attempted to influence cultural life through subsidy and regulation. During the state socialist era, culture was strictly controlled. Party interference was influenced by ideological principles and mass culture was promoted.